to press that. Our external guests, do we have them here? They're not here, so that is not relevant. So that's agenda item 1. In addition, to advise the participants the procedure of the fire drill. A fire drill is not expected, so if the alarm does sound, please evacuate the building quickly and calmly, using the stairs and not the lifts. Once outside the building, please gather outside the Yorkshire Bank on the opposite side of the road. Exit doors are those by which you entered the room by the fire exit signs, which are clearly indicated by the standard green fire exits. If you need the assistance in evacuating the building, please make yourself known to a member of staff at that time. And finally, to advise again that this meeting is being recorded and broadcast as well. Item number 2, apologies. I have apologies from Mr. Sonaloa. Any further such apologies? I'm looking around the room and I think we are in attendance. So that's item number 2. On to item number 3, moving at the minutes of the meeting of the Audit and Standards Committee held prior to the election on the 16th of March 2021. Those are attached on page 5 of your agenda. Can I have somebody to propose those minutes, please? Proposed by Councillor Hocking. Anybody second those? Seconded by Councillor Rudkin. Thank you very much. Any dissent or any comments at this stage? Any dissent? No? Then in which case I sign those as an accurate record of the previous meeting. Thank you, everybody. Agenda item number 4, declarations of interest. To receive declarations of disclosable pecuniary interests and other interests in accordance with the Members' Code of Conduct. They are listed as per the additional item that would have been circulated in the papers to members following it being updated. Does anybody have any further items to add at this stage? No, thank you very much. Moving on to agenda item number 5, which is public consultation. I have speakers on items 8, 9, 10 and 12. On that basis, I will take those public requests to speak at the appropriate points in the agendas. Item number 6, with the leave of the committee, we will move item number 6 to the end, as there may be items that wish to be added to the agenda and the work item following on from this meeting. Is there any dissent to moving that to the end of the meeting? Any comments at this stage? No, thank you. We'll come back to item number 6 then. Therefore, we move on to item number 7, which is a report from the Head of Audit and Governance. You'll find the report in page 29, but the slides are on the screen for you that Linda will take us through. So, hand over to you, please, Linda. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair requested that I do a report to outline internal audit procedures that we follow, and also to tell you the results of an external quality assessment review that was carried out in 2019. So I thought the first element about internal audit procedures was probably better provided to you in form of a PowerPoint presentation. So I'll go through the PowerPoint presentation and then I can go through the report, agenda item 7, which shows you the results of the quality assurance assessment that was done. So just the first one is just to meet the team. I'm Linda Downs, I'm Head of Audit and Governance. Just a little bit of background. I've been at the council now here since 1997. I've got 37 years experience in both internal and external audit. In central government, I work for National Audit Office, and then I've been in internal audit here. And I'm a member of the Institute of Internal Auditors and the Chartered Institute of Management Accountants. And we have, in the audit team, we have 2 full-time members of staff. We have Sophie, who's our internal auditor. Sophie's been at Nuneaton and Bedworth since 1996. She has 23 years internal audit experience. She has a qualification with the Association of Accounting Technicians and also part qualified with the Chartered Institute of Public Finance and Accountancy because she's passed the certificate level in that. And then we have Nafisa, who's our audit technician. Nafisa's been at NBVC since 2003. She has 17 years internal audit experience here and also has an Association of Accounting Technicians qualification. So as you can see, we're quite a small team, but we've got a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience in audit. So that's the definition of internal audit. I won't read it all out, but I have tried to highlight some of the key points. We have to be independent, and being independent allows us to be objective and open and transparent. We are required to add value with the work that we do and improve the effectiveness of controls and governance processes. That definition comes out of the public sector internal audit standards in section 4. On the added value side and the effectiveness of the work that we do, at the end of every audit that we complete, we send out post-audit questionnaire to the relevant manager, asking for feedback on the quality of the work that's been done, whether we've added values, if there's anything that we can change in the way that we carry out our work. That's done. So the public sector internal audit standards, they were first adopted in April 2013. They were last updated in 2017. And they establish a framework for the provision of internal audit services within the public sector. The standard covers areas such as the purpose of internal audit, independence, objectivity, professional care, quality assurance, performance, management of internal audit. It's very extensive. You can carry out your own self-assessments against the standards, but I think there's about 250 questions that you have to answer to be able to do that, so you can see how extensive they are. One of the requirements of the standards is that an external assessment of the internal audit must be undertaken at least once every 5 years. The standards came out in 2013. I asked for a quality assessment right at the very beginning. Because these standards were new, I wanted to see how we were rated against the standards, if there was any areas for improvement, so that we could introduce them as soon as possible. And then the last assessment was completed in February 2019. So the next one is due no later than 2023-24. We have got an internal audit manual that the team use. It is geared around the standards. It sets out the requirements of the standards and then the procedures that need to be followed by the team to demonstrate compliance. So we do have an internal audit plan. We produce an annual plan, and that's approved by Audit and Standards Committee in March, prior to the start of the financial year. If we do have problems, obviously COVID caused us a few problems last year. Some of our services had other high priorities to deal with, payment of grants, environmental health, we're dealing with local businesses. So we did find that there were some audits that we couldn't actually complete at all, but we did take a revised audit plan to Audit and Standards for their approval in November. We developed the plan using a risk-based approach. We have what we call an audit needs assessment, and it's literally a list of all the systems and the processes that may be subject to an audit at some time. And then each of those systems on the list are subject to a risk assessment, and that risk assessment generates a risk score. It is fairly judgmental, but the team are quite, as I said, quite knowledgeable, quite experienced. It's the team that carry out that assessment, so hopefully there is some consistency. What we consider are things such as the value and volume of transactions, if it's a financial-based review, the sensitivity of the system, if something was to go wrong, what would be the impact on the council's reputation. So, thinking of maybe cemeteries would fall into that category. if we were unable to identify who was buried in which plot, if that information was lost. Any previous frauds or irregularities that have been brought to our attention in the past. We also look at the complexity of the system. Any entries on risk registers, we have strategic risk register, and each director has their own operational risk register. So we look at the information in those risk registers as well. And we also look at the level of change and development, whether there's been any changes in legislation, in the regulations governing that system. And we provide a score and add it up and total it all up at the end of that assessment. So then the highest score that anything can achieve is 315, the lowest is 55. So if it scores anything between 201 and 315, we consider that to be a high-risk audit, and that's audited at least once every 2 years. Score of 101 to 200, it's medium risk, and that's audited at least once every 3 to 5 years. And then anything that scores less than or up to 100, that's considered too low a risk to audit at that one particular time. But we do keep those under review, so things can change. So if we become aware of any changes in a particular area that we've classed as too low a risk to audit, we would go through the risk assessment process again and see what the impact of that change would have. At the end of every audit, the risk assessment is updated by the auditor that completed the work. So we do try and keep it up to date. So this is just a list of the examples of audit reviews that we could get involved in. So we've got housing, lettings and repairs, data protection, information management, risk management, payroll, council tax, capital project management, health and safety, or fire risk assessments, business continuity and emergency planning, electrical services. They're just examples of some of the audits that we would deal with. So the actual audit process, so once we've got our audit plan approved, Sophie or Nafisa will be allocated an audit. And the first step that they do is carry out any research, and they would hold meetings with the auditee, the relevant manager, and just to get a feel for risks and issues and problems and what's happening. From all of that information, they then put together an audit assignment brief, and that sets out the scope of the audit, what they're actually going to be looking at, the risks that have been identified. It will also show anything that we're specifically excluding from the audit, because there are times when things are too low a risk to warrant one of our auditors spending time looking at it. But we would make it quite clear in the audit brief what we're excluding and the reason why. It also shows timescales, so the auditee will have an idea of when the audit's going to start, when the field work is planned to be completed, when they should be receiving a draft report. It also shows when we expect the report to be finalised, so they know the expectation on them, because we issue a draft report and then we ask for a response from them on that draft report and how they're going to deal with any issues that we've raised. So they know what their expectations of them are as well in that. Once that's been finalised, the team then develop an audit programme which shows the tests that they're going to carry out, the number of items that they're going to be looking at. They complete all of that work, and all of their findings are put into a working paper. We have a standard working paper that shows what the test was, the purpose of carrying out that test, what the detailed findings are, the key contacts that they spoke to during that. It also provides a summary of their findings, a conclusion, and any recommendations. So their working papers are quite detailed, and if we do find any issues, they are required to gather evidence to support that, and that evidence goes along with the working papers. And then, as I say, they produce an audit report. We have both draft and final, and each report will have an action plan, and the action plan will detail the issue, the problem that we've identified, what we've recommended to improve that issue. It gives a priority rating of the recommendation, and then we expect managers to respond to that by telling us what action they're going to take to implement the recommendation, who is the person responsible, and what the timescale is. The standards do require us to have a quality assurance process in place, so this is the work that I tend to do. I always approve the audit brief before it's issued, so I look at all the notes that they've made from meetings that they've had, the research and documents that they've gathered, and I agree the audit brief. I also review all the working papers and supporting evidence as soon as they've completed all of the work. And from that, I may have additional questions. I may not understand something that they've detailed in their working papers. I may want them to carry out some additional work. And so I have a management review sheet. So all of the issues I raise are listed on the management review sheet. And I don't sign that review sheet off until I've had a response back from the auditor that I'm happy with. And then once all that's been done, I then approve the draft and final reports before they're actually issued. I mentioned assurance levels. In the reports, we identify what the risks are, so they come from the audit brief, and then we identify the key controls that are managing those risks. And we give an assurance level for each of the key controls, and then from that, we're able to give an overall assurance level for the system that we're actually auditing. And we use 4 assurance levels at the moment. First one's significant. So the system of control is sound, it's being consistently complied with, no major issues at all. Satisfactory, the system of control is generally sound, but we've identified some minor weaknesses and made recommendations. Limited, there are weaknesses in the adequacy of the system of control, so it's not sound. And then we have no assurance, where controls are completely weak and it could lead to significant error. I mentioned the priority levels for recommendations. We use 5. Priority 1 is there is a serious weakness that requires immediate action. And if I'm honest, if we identify anything during the course of an audit that would warrant a priority 1 recommendation, I would expect the auditor to raise it immediately, rather than wait until the draft report is issued. We would still acknowledge it, that it is an audit finding, so we would still put it in the draft report, but we would acknowledge any action that the manager's taken to overcome the problem. And if I'm honest, we have very few priority 1 recommendations. Priority 2 is there is a weakness that could result in significant loss. Priority 3 is a weakness that could result in limited loss. Priority 4, it's a weakness, but it just causes inefficiencies. We wouldn't necessarily expect it to result in a loss to the council. And we do have priority 5, which are best practice only, so we're not expecting managers to implement these, but during the course of an audit, we might give overall significant assurance and everything's fine, but we've still identified areas of best practice that a manager could perhaps consider. So they would go in a report as priority 5. All our recommendations are subject to follow-up review. Depending on, it's normally 6 to 12 months after the final report's been issued, because obviously we need to give them time to make all the changes. The timing would very much depend on our overall opinion, the number of issues that we found, the seriousness of those issues. But all the findings of follow-up reviews are reported to Audit and Standards in my annual report, which is produced in July, and my half-yearly report, which is produced in November. And that's all that I've got to say. Are there any questions?
Councillor Tromans.
I'm the one with the dodgy.
Oh, do I have to switch mine off first?
Yeah, so you do. I've just got an observation, and then I've got 5 very brief questions, if I may, Chair. So we don't see the priority bandings that you just put up there on the kind of reports, the summaries and whatever that you bring to audit and standards. I think that kind of breakdown of how many of these priority 1s, 2s, 3s, 4s, 5s were issued, and what the breakdown was for each of the, when you do the summary of the audit activity over the year, they'll say we did an audit on this, and then we did an audit on the depot and one on here. There's a little paragraph for each and some numbers. To have the breakdown of the priority recommendations in there, I think would be very useful. It would give members a real feel for what the outcome was and how many recommendations you were making and whether they were really serious or whether it was mostly medium and light touch stuff. So I'd certainly ask that be considered and that we have that in those future reports. The quick questions I've got just to run through are, and a lot of this is for the sake of the record and for the public, and just because people are taking more of an interest and it's all live streamed and they can refer to this if they want to understand about the council. And that is, he said the way it's determined which areas you audit are down to the risk registers that are held. And I assume that they have the usual standard methodology of severity versus likelihood to determine whether something's a very high risk. Because if the severity of that risk is quite high but the likelihood's incredibly low, that's still quite a low score, and vice versa. So do they plot it on a severity versus likelihood basis, or is it just their number that the manager comes up with?
We do have a risk assessment document, so it's a standard form, and it I've provided a brief list of types of issues that we consider.
Right.
The value and volume of transactions, complexity of the system, and they do a scoring through that process rather than impact and
likelihood. Okay.
We do take account, as I said, of the information in risk registers, which does consider impact and likelihood.
So it's not the whole story, but it's an element.
It forms part of it, but it's not the whole.
Okay.
Councillor Tromans, just before you go on, can I just ask, when we're doing the response, it should be okay with the mic being close, but we switch the mics, obviously, for the recordings and the broadcast, please, if that's okay.
Okay, yeah,
Thank you.
Absolutely. Also, do you do it in response to incidents?
Incidents that are reported to us, concerns that people raise when you...
Yeah, if you had...
Oh, sorry.
To this. If there was... So there's the list of the most serious risks. That's your day job. But if something was to happen, there was to be a major incident at the council, something came to light, does that tend to trigger an audit as well?
It can. Yes, it can. It depends how severe it is. If it's a breakdown in procedures or controls, I would certainly expect them to come to internal audit so we can look at the system and try and improve it to prevent that major incident happening again. Obviously, it could have an impact on our planned work, but we would give that high priority if it was a major incident.
Thank you. And you said you put great store on the fact that, as it should be the case, internal audit is independent. Who do you currently report into at the council?
I did report to Simone up until last week when our new director, Tom Shardlow, started. So under the restructure, I now report to Tom. I do have, independence is a major thing. I do have responsibility for managing other areas of responsibility as insurance, equality, safeguarding. But if the team are auditing any of those other areas that I have any responsibility for, the director would take more control over the quality assurance of the work that's completed.
Another thing that we've never seen at Audit and Standards, which would be quite nice, is an audit action tracker. So can we have a look at that at one of the future meetings, please, Chair? Is that, I presume you've got an audit action tracker of all the outstanding audit actions and recommendations, things to be done?
It's not collated into one document. Each auditor has responsibility for their own audits that they've done, so they do the follow-ups and they follow up themselves, but we don't have anything that incorporates all of it into one document.
I kind of think as a one-off at least, we would like to see it collated so that we can have a feel, members can really understand what the whole gamut of it is. The final question I've got, and thank you for your indulgence, Chair, is consequences. I'm not sure actually, I'm not new anymore. It's been a few years since I've been a councillor. I'm not sure I've ever seen real consequences come out of audits, and it's a question that we've seen a number of times that people have only had limited assurance, perhaps on 2 or 3 audits of that area over a 10-year period. There doesn't seem to be those kind of consequences for people not completing all of their audit actions, not following up on all the recommendations, and for getting what is frankly a poor audit in the first place. I appreciate that's not your job, your internal audit, you're there to report on it. But can you give us a flavour for does anything more happen after that, or is it just left?
One thing we've just introduced it, and there's 2 reports that have gone to management team, where we give limited assurance, the full report now goes to management team, so all the directors consider the content of the report and take any action. That's been introduced for the current financial year. And just in response to your first question about having an overview of the priorities, I think in my annual report, which I mentioned is due to come in July to Audit and Standards Committee, because I have to give an overall opinion on the control environment, maybe a table that sets out all of that information would then support that overall opinion. So I'm happy to incorporate that into that report.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And something that Councillor Tromans was discussing in the pre-meeting, I think it's not unfair to say, is that was a question mark over what we as a committee could do about those areas that are concerned, particularly maybe those that have yo-yoed towards the bottom over a number of their reports. And it is open to this committee to request that managers from those relevant departments come before us and answer the questions that perhaps we have to seek our assurance. Maybe a point in July after that annual report comes through from Linda, it may be that we wish to request in our subsequent meetings managers of X, Y, Z departments to perhaps ask those questions as follow-up. So that's certainly not something that's ruled out or ruled in, but it's something we can potentially look at when we get that report in July, isn't it? Yes, in July. So that might be something we can look at when that annual report comes, and I'm certainly very open to doing that if that's what members feel that they wish to have and receive. Next speaker on the list, I've got just on questions specifically on the presentation we've had just now, Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. In terms of internal audit, where's the boundary of internal? Because obviously we've got contractors like Glendale, and also we're taking part in quite a few big projects like transforming Nuneaton Abbey Street, which will be a sort of multi-council, So how far outside the sort of narrow definition of the council do you look, particularly in terms of the risk registers on some of these joint projects? Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I think one of the items on the list where I gave you examples of what we audit was capital project management. So certainly with major projects like that, we would look at them, we would look to see how the projects are being managed, we would look at the business case, we would look at the objectives that it was planned to achieve and whether those objectives have actually been met. So it's like a post-project review, really. But no, we would, if we were doing risk management, we may look at the risk registers. But it's certainly an area that is part of our audit needs assessment, so it could be audited.
Is that a follow-up on that, Councillor Condacor?
Yes, Chair. I just want to follow up the point. You said post-project, but obviously some of these projects are quite long. So can we do mid-project risk assessments as well? Because obviously if you're building a hotel or something, it will take 3 or 4 years to get the whole thing done. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, I'm happy to consider that. And I agree there are some very major projects coming up with the development of the town centres at the moment.
Thank you, Linda. Just one from me. When we were looking at you gave the risk scores of 55 to 315, sorry, yes. You said that there was a section which is the score of 101 to 200 would be therefore sort of every 3 to 5 years. Is there anything there where the closer they are to 200, the closer it would be to 3 years? Or would it be very much, you could be at 101 and reviewed every 3 years, but you could be at 199, 200 and reviewed every 5 years? So that was sort of the more technical question on that angle, please.
I think what we take into account, we get the risk score, but it's what the audit findings were at the previous review and any major issues that we identified. So we would take those into account. So we do try to take a balanced approach, but as I said, it is very judgmental. But we have to do some form of risk assessment, and this seems to be the easiest approach that we can take.
Thank you, and just on behalf of the committee, thank you very much for that presentation. I think actually it was very helpful for returning members and new members as well, so thank you for that. I believe you actually have the actual formal report element of agenda item 7, so if you want to go into that, if there's anything further to add beyond the presentation, I don't know. Happy to pass over to you on that, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, as I said in my presentation, the public sector internal audit standards do require an external quality assessment of the internal audit service. The last one was finalised in February 2019, and attached to my report is the report that was produced as a result of that assessment. The conclusion of the report was, yes, we do comply with the public sector internal audit standards, and generally we provide an effective and efficient service. They have identified some areas for best practice that we could consider, and we have taken the majority of those on board. You'll see in paragraph 5.1 of my report, there are 3 areas that we haven't taken on board. One was the updating of the audit manual. There is an update that's due in the current financial year, so there were fairly minor changes that were recommended, so we didn't think it was necessary to make the changes there and then, but we will incorporate them in this year's review. They also recommended that the levels of assurance be reduced from 4 to 3, but we felt that by retaining 4 we were able to demonstrate more clearly the impact that the weakness or non-compliance has on the system. So it's not just good, bad or indifferent. We can give you an indication of the seriousness of the issues raised. And similarly with the priority ratings, to reduce it to 3 rather than 5 wouldn't give you sufficient information to know how serious we consider the issue to be. And also I mentioned the level 5, which is best practice. I think if we only had 3 levels, we would have to stop using that information, and that actually adds value to the report, I think, in giving managers that additional information. So they're the only 3 areas that we haven't actually adopted in the report. So.
Thank you, Linda. There's no public speaker listed for this item. So therefore, in order to enable debate, I'll move the recommendation at 2.1, the results of the external quality assessment and Appendix A, and the procedures outlined in the presentation be noted. Is that seconded? Seconded by Councillor Condacor. Thank you very much. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say that I think we're probably all pleased that there was some pushback on the idea, and that's what it was, rather than kind of a direction to cut down the level of of reporting and also the level of recommendation, because you made the points yourself that we would lose something by doing that. There's some nuances there and some additional information that do add value, and so I'm glad they've been left in. As far as the actual report itself is concerned, these things are constrained by their terms of reference, and it is very limited, and it says yes, the process was followed. It's an old report, so I'm not sure how valid it is now, from 2017-18 work that was reviewed at the end of that year and the start of 2019. I think in future it might be really useful for us to get some kind of external assessment of what use the council made of the audit reports that were produced, because it's one thing to have an external entity say the reports were produced following the normal processes, and well done there, but then what did the council do with that information? I mentioned before that there's been quite a number of reports with limited assurance, and it's about what was done to fix that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tremens. I think it's safe to say that there may be more of a role that this committee can play in seeking some of those assurances than it has done maybe in the past. And certainly if members do, as we will see from that annual report at the next meeting, as I've already indicated, if members do have a concern that we've got these areas that are low assurance, maybe they're specifically crucial to the council, they deliver real frontline services that we really rely upon, or maybe it might be that they have been in this similar position for a number of audits now. I am very happy, if members wish, that those managers come in and answer the questions from us as to why things haven't, if they have not been, why they've not been implemented, how they're going to improve, and what the procedures they have in place are to do so. And that hopefully will see this committee working hand in glove with the audit team, internal audit team, and actually where you've alluded to, Councillor Tremors, where there may or may not have been any further follow-ups in the past, actually there will be some scrutiny from this committee. So very happy to hear that, and there may be other options we may wish to decide at that particular juncture. So as has been alluded to, we have that report coming to our next full formal scheduled meeting in July, and I think we can take it from there. Any further member wish to speak or put questions? In that case, it's been proposed and seconded that the report and the contents of the presentation be noted. Is there any dissent to that? No, that report then stands noted. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, say again, Linda, for that presentation and for the to the assisting of the committee on this particular item. Item number 8 is the establishment of an employment committee. Report to be presented by Director Richardson. Philip, thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. This is a report that has been requested. An employment committee was considered last year by the Constitution Review Working Party. At that time, it was decided that it wouldn't come forward for consideration, but we've now been requested to bring it forward again. Just one slight amendment to 2.2 in the recommendations. It should refer to Appendix A, and Appendix A sets out the terms of reference for the proposed committee. I would point out, Chair, that Romans 7 on page 51 is a reflection of the officer remuneration panel, which is already in Article 8 of the Constitution. The proposal is to bring the terms of reference of that panel into the remit of this committee as well, so it does everything in one place. So it just tidies that up. Beyond that, Chair, I don't really need to say, I don't think much more. The terms of reference are set out. They are based heavily on those of another district in Warwickshire, Warwick District Council, with the addition of Romans 7. Other than that, Chair, I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much for that. We have one member of the public wishing to speak, Michelle Kondaka. if I can invite her to make her contributions. Thank you, Mrs. Kandaka. Just to clarify, I think 2 points I will at this stage. An employment committee, the recommendation, and should the committee agree, is that it would be a committee of council, and those are open, transparent, and will, if necessary, the committee will decide to sit in private on certain sessions as set out under the various acts under pink paper, as is done across every committee of this council. And you have an assurance, and the public have an assurance, that this composition of the council is absolutely wanting to see openness, transparency and scrutiny. You'll see amendments coming later to the Constitution that would re-enable some of those, and to allay any concerns thereof. Was there anything, Phil, that you wanted to pick up at this time?
Well, Chair, I think you've covered the point in terms of the constitution of this committee. It will be governed by the Local Government Act 1972, so all the normal rules and regulations would apply to it. In terms of what we have currently, the answer is we do not have a committee that deals specifically with the terms of reference that are set out in Appendix A. It's a bit of a hodgepodge between certain activities that will be dealt with by the portfolio holder in terms of certain policies and procedures. Some of it will be dealt with by the head of paid service. There are provisions within the employment procedure standing orders that deal with other aspects of it. And this really just brings it all together into one place. So it does streamline it and simplify it, Chair.
Thank you very much. Any points of clarification from any member on the question at this stage? No, thank you. In order to move to allow debate, I will propose the recommendations as printed, subject to obviously the amendment of Appendix, reference of Appendix A, and in addition with one amendment to Appendix A, being VIE, which is that a subpoint that will commission an annual performance development review of the head of the paid service. So that is as printed on your agenda in Appendix A, in addition to that one amendment to commission an annual performance development review of the head of paid service. Is that seconded? Councillor Tromans, thank you very much. Any member wishing to speak on this item? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. I'm happy to second that because it's very clear that this is about making things more transparent rather than leaving things to a portfolio holder or an officer or director. It's now a proper committee of council, as you said, with all the transparency in the minutes and the records and all the rest of it that creates. So this is about being more open to the public than we were before, which is a good thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Councillor Condacor.
Chair, I understand we're tidying things up and it is useful to have an employment committee, but I'm not sure from the reading of this if it's a committee of backbenchers or a committee of cabinet members, leaders, or a bit of both. Because obviously some of the things it's doing are quite executive-like, whereas some are quite scrutiny-like. We also have an appeals panel at the moment, which I assume would not exist if we had this employment committee doing all this stuff, or would there be still an appeals panel or pool of councils on appeal? And I feel the size of this committee is actually quite small. When we decide whether a taxi licence holder is a fit and proper person, we have about 10 councillors sitting around in this room talking about whatever the taxi driver did. I do think for something as important as the head of the paid service and all these other important issues, we should actually think about making this a committee of 7 or 9. I think 5 is very small, very... you talk about openness and transparency. I think it gives more reassurance to us on the backbenches, particularly in the smaller parties and groups, if the committee, even if we weren't on it, was actually reasonably large. I do think 5 is a very, very small committee, and it would be good if Mr. Richardson would explain to us whether these things are normally backbenchers, executives. Mentioned in here, the leader of the council is normally involved in some of these decisions. So it'd be useful to know how it works. And finally, is the chair of this committee another paid role, or would it be taken by someone like the cabinet member? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Philip, would you like to address some of those first?
Yes, thank you, Chair. If I deal with that question in terms of the appeals, obviously the role of the appeals committee is separate to the role of an employment committee, and it will still carry on to deal with any appeals that will come before it. I think, Chair, you may want to deal with those other issues. I think there were matters in terms of appointments, which clearly would be a matter for council ultimately.
Yeah, thank you for that, Philip. In respect of appointments, Philip is absolutely correct. This would be a committee of council, and it would therefore be for council to appoint whomever it saw fit for being on or not being on, based on the usual rules under the Local Government Act and subsequent, as to the proportionality of seats which would be allocated in the usual standard way under the standard methods and rules set out. In respect of who may or may not be the chair, obviously, whilst that would be a decision of council, my understanding from conversation with colleagues, and certainly a preference of mine, is that it would be chaired by the relevant cabinet member in the same way or a similar way that the Borough Plan Review Committee is established and is set up, which would mean there would be no additional SRAs, as they already received that as part of their executive function. But the composition is entirely for council. It may decide to do something differently, and I, as a chair of a committee, would never seek to predetermine or seek to try and force council to go one way or another. It will make its decisions based on what it believes as a collective body. Councillor Condacor.
Thank you, Chair. Given what you say, can I move that we change the committee size to actually be 8 members with a quorum of 5? And can I move that as an amendment?
Is there a seconder for that amendment? Councillor Hocking. Thank you. So that is an amendment that is tabled. Does any member wish to speak on the amendment? Councillor Downs. Sorry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, the one thing that scares me slightly is the fact that Councillor Condacor has picked an even number. You can always get a deadlock with an even number. That's why I like your idea of either like 5 or 7. But please, not an even number on a committee, because you just get stalemated and you never go anywhere. Thank you very much, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Any other member? No, in which case we will move to the vote. All those in favour of the amendment at this stage, which is to increase the size of the committee? 2. And those against? 9. So that is lost 2-9. So we are to the original motion, which is as laid out in the agenda, subject to the one amendment that I made at the time, VIE, which is that commission an annual performance development review of the head of paid service. Any further member on the substantive item, the substantive motion? No. All those in favour then, please, of the substantive motion? That's 10. And those against? That is 1. 1 with a request for the vote to be recorded. That item, therefore, is carried. Thank you. So that deals with item 8. Item 9 in our agendas, page 52, a report on the proposed changes to the Constitution. Those are to be presented by Director Richardson. Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. 3 changes that have been requested. The first is really to tidy matters up in terms of co-opted members. As members may know, or certainly some of the older members will know, we have attempted to recruit co-opted members and we have not been able to do that successfully. But we do have sufficient numbers for 1 co-opted member per panel and committee. So the suggestion is that we reduce the number for this committee and all the others to 1, and that's necessitated a change to Article 9. So if you look at page 54 under paragraph F, you'll see that it will now refer to the committee having the power to co-opt 1 independent member as opposed to, I think it was 4 originally. The other changes, Chair, are to council procedure rules. 1 in connection with public participation is to remove the restrictions that were imposed in terms of the definition of what a question is, and you'll see that is set out in Appendix B on page 59. 4.9.4 has been deleted. And lastly, Chair, in terms of the ability to have a mini debate in connection with any question, you'll see on page 61 of your papers, 4.10.6 has been reinserted. So those are the 3 changes, Chair, that are being recommended for approval. And obviously, Chair, it will then go on, if approved, it will go on to full council for the Constitution to be approved as amended.
Thank you, Philip. We have 1 public speaker on this item, Mrs. Condacor. Thank you very much. Anything from officers to come back on that point? No. Any points of clarification from any members? No, thank you. Well, in which case, to allow debate, I move the recommendations as set out at 2.1 to 2.4. Is that seconded? Councillor Beetham, thank you very much. Any member on this item? Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Chair. I am very happy to see these. I think it makes democracy more accessible to the public and the people we ultimately represent, especially considering, especially while it's changing. So I'm more than happy to see these in the report. I'm happy to vote for them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Kenner. Councillor Condacor.
I too am very happy to see most of these changes. We've had many years where debate was non-existent, questions weren't answered, and you could do nothing about it. The only little couple tweaks I think we might need to do, and maybe not this time, but maybe in a year's time when we see how it works, is these mini debates and things, just to make sure we don't affect our people filibustering and then actually timing out other questions. I mean, generally, the controlling group's proposals have been very welcome in terms of getting more debate, not pushing members' questions to the back and allowing the public to ask reasonable questions. So I will be supporting these, but I do ask that we don't get them abused by people effectively pushing the boundaries and therefore disenfranchising other people. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Any other member? Oh, Councillor Beetham.
So, like everyone else, I'm happy to see this come through. May I propose a slight amendment, if you will, for as we are amending the Constitution slightly, just to remove all the images from the Constitution, just to neaten up the Constitution and add that more professional look to it.
Thank you, Councillor Beetham. Whilst happy to accept, I'd ask you, is that something you want to do here, or is that maybe something you would like the Constitution Review Working Party perhaps to look at, that kind of the neat and tidiness of it, rather than bring that through this committee? Perhaps that might be an alternative. If Councillor Beetham does wish to put that as an amendment, I am happy for that to do, or if he is satisfied for that to potentially look at, to go through working party, it's up to him. So if he wants to speak, to indicate, then I'm happy to hear that.
I'm happy to put it to a working party if one occurs.
Thank you, Councillor Beetham. Then I will ask that be recorded, that it's a request to go to the working party, please, to look at that. And I think that's, looking at the sort of the general tidiness and layout is not an unreasonable thing to look at for that working party. I would add, obviously, there is the working party to look through, and the amendments that we're making this evening are ones which have been championed by myself and my colleagues on the Conservative side for many years. A number of these were removed at great haste, to which we felt disenfranchised members from all sides, controlling official opposition at the time, and the minor party at the time. This is a rolling back to a more open, transparent version of our Constitution, and I know there is work that members would like to see via the Constitutional Review Working Party to make sure that our Constitution is fit for purpose, continues to be relevant in the modern age, and is far more open and democratic than we've seen certainly in the last couple of years. So the recommendations have been proposed and seconded. Were there any final members wishing to speak? No, then we'll move to the vote. Those in favour of the recommendations as set out at 2.4. All those in favour, please. That is unanimous. If we could ask that goes to Council in July onto their agenda, please, that would be wonderful. Thank you very much. We now come to agenda item number 10. And again, this is one on the appointment of independent persons. This is a report by Director Richardson. So, Director Richardson, thank you, Phil.
Yes, thank you, Chair. There is, in addition, Chair, if I can just mention the addendum, which has also been circulated. The Council is required by Section 28 of the Localism Act 2011 to appoint at least one independent person to undertake certain functions that are prescribed in the Act. To achieve this, the Council has cooperated with the County Council, Solihull Metropolitan District Council and Rugby Borough Council, and we have jointly appointed independent persons. And the last time this occurred was in 2017. The appointments are for 4 years, and so they now fall due again. The purpose of this report, Chair, is just really to bring you up to speed with that, to explain that we are undertaking another joint recruitment, if that's the right word, exercise for independent persons. However, Chair, there are 3 of the existing panel members who we are able to use. We can't use all of them because they may well be conflicted out for other reasons, who we can reappoint at July Council, and that is the recommendation that is on the addendum. So you have 3 named individuals there who are existing independent persons but have only been independent persons for 1 term, so can be reappointed, and then 2 independent persons who have or will be finishing shortly their 2nd term, so they will no longer be eligible to carry on as independent persons. I should say, Chair, there were in the panel or in the pool of independent persons, there were additional independent persons. However, some have moved away. 1 gentleman has sadly died, and obviously there were then other members of the pool who we couldn't use because they were conflicted out because they had previously been members of the Standards Committee, which excludes them from being considered at that time. So we're down to 3, and we do need to have ideally a pool of 10, and the reason for that, Chair, is that in order to maintain independence, we need to be able to use different independent persons at different stages of an investigation, or alternatively, in some cases, may have to go to a completely new independent person because they may well be conflicted out of a particular matter. So the recommendation, Chair, is just to really note that we are making those steps to replace those independent persons. That will, we hope, come to, it won't be the July Council, it will now probably be the September Council for appointment once that process has been completed. However, Chair, the addendum is seeking approval to reappoint those 3 named individuals at the July Council.
Thank you, Philip. We have 1 public speaker, Mrs. Condacor. Thank you. Director Richardson, Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. The recruitment process is purely to establish that they are truly independent persons. In other words, that they are not conflicted out under the terms of the legislation, which, if you note in the report, there is a list of things that would exclude somebody from being an independent person. These individuals have been through that process and have established that they are not conflicted from being reappointed. In an ideal world, I think we would want to go through a recruitment exercise. However, the time is against us because of the delays in bringing forward the recruitment exercise, and we can't actually be in a point where we don't have an independent person in place. So hence the reason for the recommendation that these 3 be reappointed.
Thank you. To enable debate, therefore move the recommendation at 2.1. Is there a seconder for that? And the addendum, apologies, and the addendum. Councillor Kenner, thank you. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Conacher.
Thank you, Chair. As a point of clarification, could Philip Richardson tell us if independent people can be independent if they're a member of a political party? Do we ask them about their party allegiances? I mean, I don't know if we select them or if we're selected through County Council and Solihull as a panel, but is there any screening for political bias in their independence? Thank you, Chair.
Chair, the criteria that we use is set out in the Act and is, I think, in paragraph 3.2. So it does say, as it does say there, they shouldn't be a relative or close friend of a member, co-opted member or officer in the council's area. And they cannot have been a councillor or a member within the previous 5 years.
Thank you. Any other member wish to speak? Okay. Well, we have the motion has been proposed and seconded as at 2. To approve the recommendation at 2.1 and the addendum as circulated. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. On to agenda item 11, the arrangement for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee. This report at page 65 in your agendas. This report to be presented by Director Richardson. Philip.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, this is we've been asked to do this because obviously, you know, God willing, we will be celebrating the Queen's Platinum Jubilee next year. I think the council leader is very keen that the council looks at the options for celebrating that event. It will be a 4-day event, and there's a real opportunity here for the council to lead by example and to encourage public participation and community involvement in the event. So the request is for a recommendation to council to set up a working group in order to look at the options and how and what the council can do to support that.
Thank you very much. I know the Leader of the Council sat in the public gallery nodding. Is there anything he would like to contribute at this time? Thank you, Mr. Leader. The current member for Public Service in the gallery indicated he would like to speak. If he'd like to say anything at this point. Thank you very much. Any points of clarification from Philip at this point? No, thank you very much. So in order to continue debate, I move the recommendations as 2.1 to 2.11, 2.12 as laid out in our audit paper. Is there a seconder? Councillor Kenner, thank you very much. Any member wish to speak? Councillor Condacor.
Yet again, I think working parties as small as 5 can be problematic. There is actually no problem having an even number on a working party because the chair has a casting vote, so we do not get deadlock. That has been worked out by local government over many years. And I do think a working group of 7 would be more effective considering the busy lives people lead. There's always people who don't actually manage to attend every meeting. So I suspect I won't get support for that view, so I won't formally table it, but I do think it would be helpful for a working party to be slightly larger. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Your points are noted. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Chair. I think these recommendations are extremely important, not only to celebrate the long life and reign of Her Majesty the Queen, but also, as the leader said, to bring the community back together through a difficult year by celebrating the life of the person who has brought us all together through her entire reign. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have to say, as an ardent monarchist myself, absolutely wholeheartedly hope Her Majesty and expect Her Majesty to make to this point. I think it's very important that we, as a borough, actually do commemorate that, and we look at the works and the ways in which we can do that. I think this committee, the arrangements for a working party are absolutely spot on, and I do think that hopefully we should make some good progress. Perhaps the point raised by the portfolio holder for public services, I may take his point away and figure out who it would be, and maybe we'll ask those questions of a lovely portrait of Her Majesty outside, because certainly I would be hugely in favour of that, in absolute order to mark and respect Her Majesty. And obviously we have the mace of the symbol of Her Majesty, as I understand, which will sit on full councils and which precedes Mr Mayor, Mr Deputy Mayor as they process in. So Her Majesty is a keen, important, integral part of our local authority, and I know sits in most of our hearts. I would prefer it to be all, but certainly sits a great part in most of our hearts on this authority. And certainly I know that all my colleagues on my side share that view. So the motion has been proposed and seconded. There are no further members wishing to speak. Those in favour of those as laid out in the agenda, please. That's 10 members. Those against? Councillor Condacor. Thank you very much. That motion is carried 10-1. We come back now to the agenda that was agenda item number 6 on our agenda. Oh, apologies, I've missed. Apologies, yes. Apologies, let me rephrase that. We don't come to that. We come to agenda item 12, report on the carers allowance, as page 66 in your agenda pack. Report to be presented by Director Richardson. Philip, take away, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Again, we've had a request to look at the carers allowance. The independent remuneration panel is considering the matter currently. They did meet yesterday, and the point was raised with them. I understand that the draft report will say that the cap on the carers allowance will be removed, and a mechanism put in place to reflect the minimum wage going forward. So I think, Chair, it's perfectly appropriate for you to consider the recommendation, and then ultimately I think the report will come to full council. I will pass the recommendation on to the panel anyway, but it will come to full council in due course, and hopefully it will achieve what is set out here.
Thank you very much for that. I have one public speaker on this matter, Mrs Condacor. Mrs Condacor. Thank you. On that point, I would say I don't. I certainly do not share the view that because you're a carer, you should not do anything else in this local authority. I think that's an utterly ludicrous opinion. And I'm sorry, but I think that we should not be excluding people purely because they have to care for a loved one. Is there any points of clarification at this time on the comments? Councillor Rudkin, on clarification on Mrs Condacourt.
Yeah, I'd just like her to clarify what she's just said, actually, regarding carers and extra responsibilities. I'm quite baffled by that. I'm quite...
Well, no, there are a lot of committees and groups and things that, you know, are not part of the general role of a councillor. You know, not the standard meeting. So, if you've got to, life is a
Thank you, Councillor Rudkin. I would probably share those. In order to then start debate, I will move the recommendations at 2.1. Is there a seconder? Councillor Downs, thank you. Any member wishing to speak? Councillor Downs.
Thank you, Chair. I find it astonishing what Mrs Condacourt said, actually. I'm not, like, my children are fully grown, my wife's able-bodied, I'm in a very fortunate position. However, I know that in certain councils, friends of mine who have got disabled children have got disabled partners. And to say that you can't allow for pre-meetings or post-meetings, we're only really looking at 45 minutes either side of the meeting. So I think that we should wholeheartedly recommend this goes forward. Like I said, I'm in a very fortunate position. I don't need the allowance, but I do know of other people that will need it coming in the future. And also, single parents, you know, men and women that need carers to take care of the children. So, yeah, I'm going to vote this through. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Downs. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. We absolutely have to increase our appeal to get in a wide and more diverse group of people to be councillors. You know, trying to exclude anyone on the basis of finances, putting barriers in anybody's way. You know, if people have got caring responsibilities and they are so multiple and varied, you know, we can't list them all. I don't care what their caring responsibilities are. And they need to have an allowance that covers absolutely all of their out-of-pocket expenses. Nobody should ever be excluded from being a councillor if that's their calling. If they've got something to contribute to their community in the council, in the borough, then we need to make sure that we don't put any barriers in their place whatsoever. And if people are worried about, oh, you know, I'm just not going to be able to afford the childcare or the whatever, we ought to be covering all of that. I've personally never claimed a penny in expenses from the borough and probably don't ever intend to. But that's not the point. You know, not everybody's circumstances are the same. And if there is anybody that is put off being a councillor because they've got these concerns, then we absolutely have to reassure them, send a very loud message that we will cover all of their out-of-pocket for anything like this to make sure that they can turn up to all the meetings that they can contribute to. And it shouldn't be about, oh, well, if they, you know, kind of, if they're going to claim benefits, then, you know, or going to claim this allowance, then they shouldn't come to too many meetings. If they got something to contribute, God bless them, and I'm glad they're coming.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Councillor Rudkin.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to echo what's been said. I'm fully supportive of removing any obstacle barrier that stops people from thinking that, you know, they can't become a councillor for whatever reason, due to childcare or caring. I fully support this, and whatever it takes for people to get involved, then let's do it. I fully support this, and pleased it's here. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Rudkin. Councillor Kenner.
Thank you, Chair. I, again, agree with my colleagues that these are incredibly important proposals. I think the overriding message from colleagues is that democracy should be accessible to everyone, regardless of their personal circumstances. So I will absolutely vote these through because they are important for everyone in the borough. Thank you.
Councillor Condacor.
Thank you very much, Chair. I think the point's being misunderstood that my wife has mentioned. I think the point was we should be using technology to actually make council more accessible. It is a great pity now, for example, the county council, that we have to go to Warwick to actually ask a question at a council meeting. And a lot of the technology we had during lockdown actually enabled a greater amount of people to take part in democracy. And so I think the point is we need to try and make council, particularly training and all the stuff we do, that isn't actually a formal meeting, accessible by electronic means rather than actually expecting everyone to be physically always present. I think that gives us massive benefits in terms of inclusivity, and also a lot of people can time shift things. You know, a lot of the training we do, we had planning policy the other night, we've had planning and licensing. Actually having stuff done electronically actually makes us more inclusive and allows people to record it and time shift it as well. So please don't take it that we are against people taking part. We actually want a greater involvement, which is why the use of technology is a great enabler and reducing the barriers to people physically having to sort out a care and come somewhere when there's actually technology, which, we have meetings that people need to be at. Yeah, it's not like we aren't going to replace meetings with electronic meetings all the time, but we also need to be using technology a lot more. Thank you, Chair.
Can I just ask Director Richardson, in respect of use of technology at meetings, be those formal meetings of the council, so this committee, for example, council, other committees, is it possible for councillors to be absent and to be on Teams at the moment under the current legislation, or do they have to physically be present to be able to have their voice heard and to cast their vote?
I think you know the answer to that question, Chair. As you know, the temporary arrangements under the COVID Act, the Coronavirus Act, stopped or ceased on the 7th of May. So from now on, all members to be a participant in a meeting have to be physically present in the chamber in order to be able to cast their vote and to participate in the debate. I would say, Chair, it's a slightly different scenario for members of the public. It is possible for a member of the public to, because they're not actually part of the meeting, they could in theory participate remotely. However, we don't currently have the technology that would facilitate that, because it would have to be what we term a hybrid meeting, and we just can't do that because members wouldn't be able to hear or see what the member of the public was saying or doing. Having said that, Chair, I can also say the government is currently consulting on proposals to look at the possibility of hybrid meetings, so that if there were issues like people not being able to get to a meeting, that we might at some point in the future be able to hold a lawful meeting with elected members attending remotely, but we're not there yet. We're still governed by the provisions of the 1972 Act, and that very clearly stipulates that the members have to be physically present at the meeting.
Thank you for that, clarification. Councillor Beetham.
As a carer myself and currently a councillor, initially going forward to be a councillor, putting yourself forward, there are concerns and thinking who will look after and how much out of pocket you'd be is always going to be a factor into that. And in that regard, I'm glad to see this moving forward. I haven't claimed it so far. I'm not sure if I will need to in future, but at the moment I think this stops a lot of that umming and ahhing, because we should get a broad spectrum of everyone's views in society, not just those able without commitments, but those who are carers, those who do have disabilities, those who are new parents. And if things happen whilst you're a counsellor and you suddenly take on the responsibility of a carer, you shouldn't then have to dramatically think everything needs to come to a halt. So that's why I'm supporting this.
Thank you, Councillor Beetham. Your comments remind me, and as the Deputy Leader of the Council is sat in the public gallery now, remind me of something that is echoed by her regularly when the matter of changing places, which she is so passionate about, comes before this authority in any committee and guise, and that is it takes one thing to happen to become responsible for caring for a loved one. That could be, any of us could be hit by a bus tomorrow, and while circumstances may at one point be one matter, literally the blink of an eye, lives can change. And I think it's absolutely right and proper that this council acknowledge that fact and support anybody who is or who may wish to. I certainly know from conversations with prospective candidates, one of the biggest things for single parents is that the family may not be able to have the child all the time, or for somebody that cares for a loved one. And that can be somebody of any age, because the stereotype of caring for your elderly wife or husband in elderly age is not the only form of caring responsibilities, as we've heard from Councillor Beetham this evening. So I think it's very important to be inclusive. And these people that are carers, but also people who have disabilities and other such individuals, have a great deal to contribute on how actually local authorities could be run. They are more likely to be service users themselves, and therefore of this council, and therefore actually be able to give us some insight, real first-hand insight into the difficulties faced and how we can improve lives for people in their situation, in similar situations, and potentially in other situations. So I would wholeheartedly endorse the recommendation as set out this evening, and I thank councillors for their comments. Any final speakers? There were none on my list, but excellent, thank you. So the motion has been proposed and seconded as set out at the recommendation as 2.1 go forward. As many of those in favour, please indicate. Unanimous, thank you very much. That item goes forwards. Now we will go back, apologies for having missed that earlier, to item 6, which is the core work programme 21-22, and a report by Director Richardson. Philip. My apologies. Apologies. Yes, it was Linda's to lead on this one. Apologies, Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, there are 5 planned meetings of this committee in the current municipal year, in July, September, November, January and March 2022. And at Appendix A to the report is the core work programme for this committee for those 5 meetings. What's listed in this table are the key reports that are produced annually, either by myself if it's internal audit related, by our external auditors who are Grant Thornton, or if it's standards related, either Phil Richardson or somebody from Legal Services. And what's attached at Appendix B to the report is the terms of reference of this committee that are currently in the Constitution. So you can have a look to see what your role and responsibilities are and compare that to the core work programme to see if there are any changes that are necessary. So I think that's all I need to say. If there's any questions.
Thank you very much. We don't have any public items as speaker on this, so in order to enable debate, move recommendations 2.1 that the Appendix A be moved. Is that seconded? Is that second? Councillor Clongcord second. Any member wishing to speak or push forward amendment at this stage? Sorry, Councillor Kenner. Sorry, I didn't see your hand.
No problem. Just got a few notes on things I would like to see added to the work programme, if that's at all possible. So in September, for there to be an audit update on the Civic Hall following the previous audit on things like what actions, recommendations have been carried out. And also in November, to see a report on delegated authority, including ways that can be amended to put a requirement to consult with the relevant elected members, rather than just the current state of it being optional. Two more. An audit on community groups, still in November, that'll be funded over the last 10 years, including things like due diligence, like what was done in advance, what follow-up audits were carried out, especially on how money was spent, to make sure it's spent correctly, and also how much we've spent on these outside community groups. And finally, in November, to add an audit of compensation claims in the last 10 years, including compromise agreements. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for those, Councillor Kenner. Is there a seconder for those, Councillor Beetham? I'm happy to accept those as a friendly amendment with the leave of the meeting. Councillor Tromans.
Hey.
Councillor Kenner, if you could just turn your mic off, please.
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Did make some notes. I'd fully support all of those. I wonder if at your discretion we could find time to put a couple of other things in there. I'm particularly thinking about an audit of where the Section 106 monies have gone. Have they all been collected in on time? What were they for? Where did they actually go? What are we holding? All the rest of it. And also, this is something that's been brought up by residents many times in the past, and that's been where they've had communications from the council that they have felt have been oppressive in some way, or actually have threatened legal action, or have demanded things, or issued stop now notices, or something along those lines. And we understand that there are restrictions on council tenants, and that the council can remind people of their tenancies, but it's not just that, it's stuff that goes beyond that. And I think we could all do with a much clearer understanding of what notices have been issued, what the circumstances were, and all the rest of it, and what the criteria for that is. So if those two items, if you could find time in the work programme for those, that would be much appreciated by residents, I think.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Yes, I don't see we can find time in programmes for those. I'm just sort of looking at our potential future programme. I'm obviously very keen. We've got the one additional item for September. I'm keen to try and avoid anything further in that, on the basis of September will be quite a busy meeting for us with the statement of annual accounts that we'll have to go through. So, but I think Philip Richardson has a point he wished to raise, so I'll bring him back in here, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I mean, just looking at the programme, January or March is lighter than, obviously with Councillor Kenner's, I think he put 3 into November, which is going to be quite a heavy meeting. So I would have thought those from Councillor Tromans, if they could go January or March, that would be probably the best time.
What if the Chair, are they not good if you're those?
Right, just a moment. Let's just Let's just pop back to our work programme. Councillor Tromans, suggestion of January for those. Would you be satisfied with those, Mr. Councillor Tromans?
I'm happy with whatever you think, Chair. Yeah, that'll be fine.
Excellent. So I'm happy again to take those as a friendly amendment to go on to our January programme. Was there any further member that wished to speak? Councillor Condacor. Councillor Condacor, yes, thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I was just a bit concerned by this big look back over the last 10 years. Might take a lot of Linda's resources away from doing stuff that is vital for actually keeping us on the straight and narrow and auditing stuff going on at the moment. And so I would hope that we could actually look back over a shorter time frame if you wanted to look back. But it's always important to learn lessons from the past, but we also need to actually be auditing what's going on at the present. And I don't know if Linda's got the resources to, or resource issues in terms of these backward-looking reviews and what value they would have looking back so far. So I don't know if Linda could comment on resource issues and whether we could actually do a more modest sampling of the past rather than spending a large amount of the council's current bandwidth effectively looking back so long.
Thank you, Councillor Condacor. Director Richardson wanted to make a point.
Yes, Chair, it was really just to get a bit more clarification from Councillor Troman's issues in connection with... at the moment I've got stop notices, but I think it was much broader than that. I'd be grateful for a bit more clarity because clearly we serve a lot of notices and send an awful lot of letters. So if we could try and narrow that down, it would be very helpful.
Yeah, Councillor Troman, if you'd like to just sort of narrow those terms, I think you said a couple more, but if you want to just restate them a little more slowly so we can jot them down, that'd be great. Thank you.
Absolutely. In a nutshell, we are looking at what the issue is that the public are concerned that the council sends out a lot of notices that might be quite oppressive, and we want to demonstrate that the actions of the council aren't. Now, there are a group of notices that go out to council tenants, and I'm sure it's very easy for us off our system to be able to approximate that and give the kind of categories that they covered. But then there's going to be a relatively small number, we hope, of bespoke letters that are sent to determine whether there's proportionality involved there. Obviously, all local authorities will have some need for these remedies. We just want to understand the extent to which they've been used. And I'm not talking about 10 years. You know, the last, kind of 2 or 3, 4, 5 years would be fine. For Section 106, we certainly don't need to go back more than 5 because we didn't have any then to speak of. So mine should be far less time consuming. Thank you.
Excellent. And so I think just for the committee to set out its scope, you'd be happy for those legal items for, say, 2 years? Okay. And to scope those to the previous 2 years on those legal notices, just to give us some clarity in scope and that. Linda, you wanted to come back on something?
Yeah, it was just a couple of things really. A follow-up audit of the Civic Hall is in the current year's audit plan. But because of the issues that we raised, obviously the Civic Hall is being used as a vaccine centre at the moment, so it's difficult to do a follow-up review, so the timing will have to fit in with when it changes and when it comes back to normal business. And on the Section 106 monies, we have audited that before, but off the top of my head, I don't know how long ago that was, but I can certainly have a look and see how long ago it was and what issues we identified.
Forgive me, Chair.
Councillor Tromans.
Yeah, forgive me, Chair. It was a little while ago. There's been a lot of movement since then. There'll have been a lot of key points, and I think the council knows that it's missed some of those. That's why we've got Julian on the case now, collecting them in. So an audit would be timely on that, an update. Thank you.
And I think just the final point is, as I said in my presentation, we have got an approved audit plan, and I think this additional work will impact on that because I've only got 2 full-time auditors. So I think we'd have to have an agreement from this committee as to what work we would take out of the plan to accommodate this additional work.
perhaps as a way around that, we could look for that plan to come to July committee, or certainly or that plan to be on the agenda at July committee, so this committee can perhaps take a view at that point if it is that that you need scope, and maybe it can be that we could ahead of that work out maybe some additional hour or a rough approximation of what sort of time might be required for the items that it's requesting, and perhaps look at roughly the time scales of items already in the plan, and there may be ways to do something that might take a 2-day audit, might be able to switch for another item that would be a 2-day audit, etc. Perhaps that would be the best way to do that, given the suggestions and amendments tonight, to go away and for officers to be able to then look at what the scope is, what the work might be required on that, and come back in July to then amend, because I know we're looking at September for the civic call was the first item, so there is a little bit of time potentially to look at that, and gives us a chance in July to say, okay, these are some of the things we could look to shift about if that is required. Would that satisfy officers?
Yeah, I can do that for July. Maybe I can look at the risk score, so we perhaps take out some of the lower risk items rather than concentrate on how long it would take us. It's very difficult to know how long an audit's going to take, because until you actually start the work, you don't know what issues you're going to find and how long it takes you to look at it. But I can certainly look at the risk scores and recommend that we take out some of the lower risk ones. And with the civic hall, I'm not sure whether we could do the follow-up in September, because I'm not sure how long it's going to remain as a vaccine centre for us to look at the way that they actually operate normally under normal business with the bar and the shows.
Well, was there obviously there was, and I remember this going back to when I sat on Audit and Standards, which hadn't been for a while until reappointment as chair. The civic hall was done at that stage. Has there been follow-up presented yet from that? Because if I remember correctly, the report was probably about, the audit was done probably about 12 months. No, it would be more than that now. It would be 18 months to 2 years ago, sort of rough time we're talking. So assuming there would have been obviously about a 12-month period for them to have looked at those, was there anything done at that stage, maybe just prior to COVID, that maybe didn't necessarily, some of the work was done, but maybe not necessarily wholly completed? I think the point of the committee, if I'm surmising sort of the points, is I think there'd like to be assurance that in those months following the audit, which I would suggest would be about 12-ish months, I would have thought roughly from timescales, that there was some work done and they've reported some of those back to you. It may be that some of those weren't done, and actually maybe is it a case of the committee should be asking the management at the civic hall those questions rather than the follow-ups. Happy if there are any views in that respect from officers to hear those.
Yeah, this was one audit where the director did attend the meeting and give feedback as to what action was being taken on the issues that we identified. And I recall it being a Teams meeting, so that was probably around about July last year when committee meetings, virtual committee meetings were introduced.
Thank you. Perhaps this is something that that item with leave of Councillor Kenner, we could perhaps look at scoping a little bit further what might be possible, what might not be possible, and what we want to see. I do agree that we need to see some assurance that even prior to the lockdown, that those improvements sort were being made. There's a huge amount of money spent, public money spent within the civic hall. It's certainly a large proportion of our general revenue fund goes to them as a single item. So I certainly certainly would think we would like those assurances, but maybe perhaps we can discuss, and perhaps Linda can perhaps discuss with myself as chair, if the committee agrees, a way that we could find what could be done at this stage, and we can produce and perhaps bring some suggestions back to July, and we can potentially reevaluate then and look at what might be possible and feasible at that point. So is that accepted by Councillor Kenno? Is he happy to withdraw that point pending those further conversations, the specific on the Civic Hall September?
Yeah, the specific point on the Civic Hall, that one, or the full amendment?
No, the specific point on the Civic Hall would he be content to remove that on the basis that, as chair, I'll go away and have a discussion with Linda and scope how we can best have something specifically on the Civic Hall come back at an appropriate juncture, so that I think the concerns of certainly the concerns of a number of the members of this committee can be answered, and we can be assured on those points. But perhaps we can take that offline, Linda and myself as chair, to scope that, and we can bring a suggestion back to July of how and when and what that might look like, having sort of fleshed the meat out a little bit further. So on that basis, specifically, would Councillor Kenner be happy to withdraw the item for the September, specifically on the Civic Hall, so that those scoping and decisions and discussions can be taken, and committee can look again in July at that specific item, and we can look at a way potentially to add that to the future programming at that stage?
Okay, yeah, more than happy for that to happen. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other member? Councillor Condacor.
Thanks, Chair. On the other issues that Councillor Kennan recommended, is it likewise worth actually doing a decision in July once we actually know the resource implications of all the things on the wish list? Because it could be quite onerous to go back over a long number of years, and so maybe actually scoping that to a more manageable level might also be worth doing for July. July is not actually that many days away. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I think the other items are moved and seconded. If Councillor Kenner wants to make a comment or an amendment at this stage, I'm happy to hear that. But equally, if the committee wants to decide, and we have discussed that obviously we will bring back the entire internal audit programme to the committee for it to look at, potentially removing items to allow this works to go forwards at July. I think if we are setting what we want to be our future work programme, that's what we're doing here. And the other item effectively is looking at the internal audit more generally, to look at that. So I think that would be appropriate to bring that particular item separately back in July. Any other member on that basis? No. So we have, and for the record, I will to go through this. We have the motion, therefore, down is to approve the recommendations at 2.1, that the Audit and Standards Committee core work programme for 21-22 at Appendix A be approved, with the addition of the delegated authority report in November, the community groups in November as well, and the legal compensation, including compromise agreements, come to November as well, and the addition at January of the Section 106 monies and the item on the legal notices, legal letters, their type format as laid out by Councillor Troman. So those are the extra 5 items that would be added at this stage, with the proviso that Linda and I will look away at what, if anything, might be possible to the best mechanism to get those assurances on the Civic Hall that I think members would like. So on that basis, there's no more speakers indicating. Those in favour of the a motion as detailed on the agenda and the amendments as laid out. (10). And those against? 1. Thank you. That motion is carried. Item 14, other items. We have an item under this section, reports coming from Linda Downs, the head of Audit and Governance, on the update on the Information Commissioner's Office. Linda.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, at the request of Councillor Walmsley, the Chair of this committee, he asked for a report on the work of the Information Commissioner and any obligations of the Council, either from a legal perspective or during an investigation. So in section 4 of the report, that just sets out the key work that the Information Commissioner is responsible for. They are the independent regulator for data protection, freedom of information and environmental information. So if we have any data breaches that we feel are reportable, we are obliged to report those, and we only have 72 hours in which to report data breaches, which is very time consuming because the 72 hours includes Saturday and Sunday. So if something happens on a Friday afternoon and you're coming up to a bank holiday Monday, you've got to act very quickly. So we have automated the process. Data breaches are reported through the system. There are a group of 5 of us that receive an email alert, and then one of us can then go in, look at the breach, the details behind it, and consider whether it's reportable or not. We can also have members of the public that can make complaints. They may have put in an information for freedom of information requests or environmental information, and if they're not happy with the information they provide, they can go to the Information Commissioner and make a complaint. We are any breaches, I think it's paragraph 4.4, since the new legislation came in, if the Information Commissioner considers that it's a serious case, they can actually issue a monetary penalty of up to 17.5 million or 4% of an organisation's total turnover. So it is financially, it is very important that we comply and we look at the way that we manage our information. All data controllers, and a data controller is somebody that processes personal information, has to register and pay a fee to the Information Commissioner. So in Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council, we are a data controller, we are required to pay a fee, so we are recorded on the register. And 5.3 shows the information that's recorded on that register. If there is an investigation, if we do make a report to the Commissioner, any investigation that they're doing, they will expect all public authorities to engage positively with whoever's been nominated to carry out that investigation. They may ask for additional information. They will give us deadlines as to when they want to receive that information. They will obviously take into account the amount of information they're asking and volume to give sufficient time, but sometimes the deadlines are quite tight. There was a potential data breach that happened in March. The Information Commissioner is currently investigating that potential breach, so we can't give any more detailed information on that until the investigation is complete. So I think that's as much as I'd want to say. If there are any questions.
Thank you, Linda. As this is an urgency item and came out after the deadline at which members of the public would ordinarily be asked to specify if they wish to speak or not, is there any member of the gallery that wishes to raise anything at this time in the purposes of openness and transparency? This is something I do like members of the public to be able to speak if they wish to, but obviously this report came out after the deadline and the fact it's special urgency. I have Councillor Golby, Deputy Leader of the Council, indicating from the public gallery. Thank you, Councillor Golby. Does anybody? Linda.
My understanding is that the Information Commissioner has accepted that it was a breach, and that's why they're carrying out an investigation, and the investigation is now looking at the impact that that breach has had to establish whether there is any further action that needs to be taken, whether there are any changes that are necessary in our procedures, and we're waiting on the outcome of that. But that is my understanding of where we are at the moment.
Thank you. Again, on the same principles as outlined before, the Leader of the Council, Councillor Wilson, is indicating, as I say, as a reminder that this item, as its special urgency, came after the deadline at which people will be asked to register if they wish to speak from the gallery, and therefore I am allowing currently submissions by hand. Apologies to those watching at home, we don't have a roving mic. Hopefully you picked up the tone of the question from Councillor Golby, was that the paperwork states investigating a breach, and the question was, is that actually been ruled a breach, or whether that is it is currently still a part of the investigation. So just for members of the public at home. Councillor Wilson wishes to make a point. What I will do actually is I'll ask Councillor Wilson to speak, and then afterwards, before officers come in, I'll try and summarise that for the public, obviously who won't be able to hear that, and then I will seek for a response from relevant officers then. Thank you. Councillor Wilson. Thank you. For those at home, obviously won't have heard what Councillor Wilson said. He did remind us that obviously there's a legal process and this is a quasi-legal matter at the moment. And he asked us to note the context that the potential maximum fines that are able to be issued out by the ICO being £17 million is roughly the equivalent to 1 year of the general revenue fund within this local authority. That is the fund that pays for and covers most of the services that most members of the public would see on a daily basis, and then provide a little element of context for the committee. So was there anything officers wanted to come back on Councillor Wilson's points? Any points of clarification for Councillor Wilson at this time?
No, I perfectly agree, I think, and that's why I put in the report. I don't think at this point in time we should discuss that breach any further.
Thank you to Councillor Wilson and to Linda for the response there. Any further member from the gallery? No, thank you very much. In order to allow debate and further discussion then, I will move the recommendation 2.1 as laid out under the paper of agenda item 10, which is a separate document and will be listed separately on the website for those looking at home, because it was a special because it is a matter of urgent item considered under the relevant sections of agenda item 13. So that is I propose that. Is that seconded? Councillor Beetham, it's seconded. Thank you. Any member wishing to speak? Councillor Tromans.
Thank you, Chair. Mindful of what's been said earlier, I just want to, for the record, clarify a couple of things. Page 3, item 5.4, organisations must report any breach. No, that's not correct. I'm looking at the ICO's website here, and in bold in the middle of the page, it does stress that not all breaches need to be reported. In fact, they'd be inundated if they were. They give you a very helpful self-assessment tool on there, which makes it clear that the threshold for reporting a breach to the ICO is quite high. Although these breaches need to be recorded internally as part of our obligations under the GDPR Data Protection Act, reporting them to the ICO, they have to have some reasonable harm behind them or the potential for that. I'd like to know who made the determination to report it to the ICO at the council. And I'd like to, Linda says that she's advised, she believes that the ICO are currently investigating this. I'd like to know who that information came from, just for the record. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Does anyone want to come back on anything on that? Linda.
Yeah, with regard to your first point, apologies, I totally agree. It's not all personal, all data breaches that have to be reported. And when we receive a data breach, if we have any doubts, we do have a data protection officer. Matthew Deeves is actually employed by Rugby Borough Council, but we've got a formal written agreement that he provides data protection officer services to Nuneaton and Bedworth Borough Council as well. He's very knowledgeable, so we do seek advice from him as to determine whether anything is reportable or not. And I have to say that, you know, in the time that I've been responsible for data protection and information management, we haven't had to report very many of the data breaches that have been reported. And reports we receive on average 1 a week across the year. So they're about 50, just over 50 per year.
Thank you. Any member before I bring Councillor Tromans back in? Councillor Tromans.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So, sorry, the two questions are who reported it to the ICO, who made the determination to report it to the ICO rather, and who is saying that it's currently still under investigation by the ICO. Thank you.
It was the data protection officer that actually completed the online form to report it to the ICO. We have received some lines of inquiry from them, so we know that it is under investigation. And when they complete their investigation, they will tell us the outcome, and we haven't received any outcome report from them.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Tromans. Any further member on this item? No. I would ask, when the ICO is conducting the investigations as they are, do we get, as the authority or organisation reporting that potential breach, do we get any indication on how long these investigations may take? Is there any guidance on how long investigations should take? At what point should we, as a local authority, really be expecting to hear back outcomes so that we can look at those as an authority, potentially as a committee further down the line, but certainly as an authority, and do whatever lesson learning the ICO may have for us, or any sort of internal reviews following that sort of response back from the ICO?
No, we have no idea of timescales. It very much depends on the caseworker, the detailed investigation that they're carrying out, how much information, additional information they require that wasn't in the report. Sometimes because we have to report it so quickly, we just provide a report with the information that we have to hand at the time, and then they'll ask for additional information as needed. They may want to have, depending on what the investigation is, they may want face-to-face meetings with people. They'll ask for additional documentation. So every investigation is different, and we have no jurisdiction over the way they carry out that investigation and the timescales that they follow. We just have to report it and wait for the outcome.
Thank you on that point. As a sort of follow-up question on that then, to your knowledge, has the authority provided all information that's been requested to date? Have we actually been asked for additional information yet? And if so, is everything complete from our end, as it were, in respect of the information required by the ICO?
Yes, yeah, we've provided them with all the information they've asked for.
Thank you very much. There wasn't any members earlier, but any members that may have wanted to contribute anything following on from that? No, the item has been proposed and seconded that the recommendations in 2.1 be agreed. All those in favour? That is unanimous. Thank you very much. Before we go, I'd just like to say on behalf of the committee, certainly this committee and I'm sure all colleagues, a huge thanks to Councillor Beetham. As we know and as alluded to at the start, hopefully this meeting's gone on without any technical issues. It is the first session that we have live streamed using the built-in microphones and the cameras that are in the room that would normally provide the post-meeting feed, and hopefully those should have gone out touchwood live. I've not had anything in the meeting that tells me that people can't see, can't hear, noting that there had been issues with sort of camera in the back of the room on quality and sound. A huge thanks to Councillor Beetham, who has been working with the council's in-house technical teams, and with his expertise and knowledge, we have managed to hopefully get that resolved now in this room, and at a very small cost to the authority of about £120 or so, I believe. So excellent work using existing infrastructure, modernising that at small cost to ensure huge openness and transparency to the proceedings of this meeting, and hopefully, as long as it's gone well, to many meetings to come in the future. With that, declare the meeting closed, and thank you all for attending. Thank you.